In 2018, there have been 307 mass shootings and 12,000 gun-related deaths in the United States. This number has doubled since the year 2000, with 4 out of the 5 of the most lethal mass shooting incidents having occurred in the last 3 years. Obviously, this is a problem, and every problem needs a solution. It's similarly obvious that fewer guns would mean fewer deaths. Sensible gun control laws, such as banning assault rifles, requiring safety training before obtaining a gun permit, and the elimination of so-called gun show loopholes, would significantly lower the frequency of these sorts of horrific incidents. Despite the clear benefit of these sorts of common sense initiatives, however, pushback against anti-gun legislation is strong. The NRA is a potent force in American politics at every level of government, and the organization's influence is far-reaching and well-funded. Founded in 1871, the National Rifle Association began to actively lobby against firearm legislation in 1975. It is currently considered to be one of the top 3 most influential lobbying groups in Washington. The group boasts at least 16 million members and generated $433.9 million in revenue in 2016. $419 million of that 2016 revenue was reinvested as campaign contributions in that year's presidential election. So this is a big deal problem. The NRA is powerful because it is well funded, and candidates want this money for their campaigns so they can win. Candidates can only get this money, however, if they align their platforms with those of the gun lobby. All this money results in electoral victories and accounts for the very strong pushback against common sense gun legislation. The Second Amendment is the one that means Americans have a right to own firearms. This amendment came with the Constitution way back in 1776. At the time, it made a lot of sense. Our new nation was fighting for its very existence without the help of a clearly defined professional military. Local militias were crucial to securing the country's future, and as an article in The Guardian points out, the founders believed that all citizens should be part-time soldiers because they believe a standing army was an existential threat to the nation. Clearly, however, the country now has a large standing army. In fact, the largest army in the world. So, is there still a need for local militias? I think not. Additionally, when the amendment was made, we were talking about muskets, not about assault rifles. Despite what gun rights activists say, the Second Amendment is outdated and doesn't protect Americans anymore, but instead puts them in jeopardy. There are 2 very different extreme solutions to this issue. On the one hand, we can simply ban firearms and take all the 300 million guns away, or we can leave everything the way that it is and simply continue to ignore the escalating problem of gun violence. Because gun rights are a political wedge issue that many Americans on both sides feel very passionate about, compromise has not been achieved. The right believes that the Second Amendment serves as a safeguard against tyranny and that the will of the founders should be upheld and respected. The left, in contrast, argues that laws should evolve to reflect the society that it governs. The process of amending the Constitution is complicated and requires overwhelming majority support, so repealing the Second Amendment is not likely to happen anytime soon, with half of the legislative branch obtaining the former opinion and the other half obtaining the latter. My aforementioned solution to ban assault rifles, require training before granting permits, and closing the gun show loophole isn't extreme. It is a common sense approach that compromises as best it can between the 2 sides of an issue while still being practical. Gun violence and gun-related deaths, especially mass shootings, can be prevented by enacting this sort of very basic legislation. Semi-automatic firearms have been used in the majority of mass shooting incidents, and taking them off the streets would at least limit casualties in these horrific crimes. Similarly, receiving safety training before getting a gun permit would perhaps limit horrific gun accidents, which happen all too often, particularly to young children. And closing the gun show loophole, which allows private citizens to sell firearms without doing background checks on buyers, would make sure that guns don't fall into the wrong hands. No solution will please everyone, but I think human lives matter more than metal.